Hey guys, welcome back to Anchored and Devoted. He is Pastor.
I am Joseph.
I didn't say his name. He's Pastor Joseph. No, I just said Pastor.
And I said I am, and then I paused and said Joseph.
Boy, if we were professionals, we'd probably do that better.
If we were, but we aren't. And this is still not in our garage, so we're doing good.
All right, this is Anchored and Devoted, and we are your two idiot friends.
There we are.
So today we're going to jump into the next 30 minutes or so.
Maybe 30 minutes.
And talk about colonial Christianity.
There it is.
Colonial Christianity.
Yeah. We are not doing anything for this. This is not being stuck in my head any further than when we hit end for this episode. No,
that's good band. I know of a person. This is a third-hand report now.
Okay.
Who was working on this person was working on a doctorate in African American studies, and their thesis was on the impact of Christianity in Africa or in African countries.
Okay.
And the report goes something like this. The person who was, I forget the word, the person who was the reader for the thesis, gave feedback that the thesis, the whole research needed to be changed because there was suggestions and implications that could lead to the conclusion that Christianity, the impact of Christianity in Africa, was not all terrible. That there was, but the possibility that there was some good done by the Christian missionaries and mission organizations that did work in Africa. And this surprised the person who was writing this, from what I understand, because they too were of the opinion that missionaries, especially Christian missionaries, when they come into a place, just make a mess of things and ruin cultures and go on cultural genocide or try to make the quote unquote target population become like the culture of the sending organization. But this person, being of this opinion, had to push back and say, well, I agree that it's mostly bad, but it's not all bad. And there is some good that actually did come of this that is clearly demonstrable here in the research that I've done. That's kind of the starting point for where I'm thinking about this, because as you and I were talking about this, you worked for, was it 2 years, 3 years?
3 years. 3 years? Almost 4.
3 years?
Almost
as a missionary.
Yep.
Specifically
Northern Saskatchewan.
With First Nations people.
Yep, Aboriginals.
And 2 years ago, there were reports that started coming out in the Washington Post, New York Times, that described mass grave sites, mass burial sites of children who had been forced to go to missionary schools. Since then, the reporting has gone mostly silent, but all the reporting that has been done demonstrates that the reports that first came out back in 2019 have not in any way been substantiated. There have not been any mass graves that have been found. Whew! Dodge that bullet, right? There are no mass graves of children that had to go to missionary school. Except that, while we might be able to say, hey, I'm so glad that report was false, we might have an impulse to say, look at how the world frames this thing. They're always trying to dog on us Christians and on the work that God's doing, and they're going to make up any kind of reports to make us look bad, and they're just going to throw all these libelous and spurious claims out there that are obviously untrue. It would be easy because of the fact that we have some evidence of that, or at least what looks like it could be evidence, to dismiss the legitimate claims that a lot of good work has gone out in the name of missions, and a lot of not good work has also gone out in the name of missions.
Yeah,
and in the midst of doing missionary work, and we have to wrestle with that duality.
It is clear from the Aboriginals that I served with, as well as the community that I was a part of, that missionaries are not looked upon highly and I've stated this in another episode, because they don't really stay and engage. And yet there is a history of uh, um, the church dividing the provinces of Canada, and then sending forth missionaries to collect the children of Aboriginals, um, with the goal of
Mm.
moving them from heathen to holy. And the process for that often required a removal, at least as it was done, of their indigenous culture. And that's a huge red flag. And I get that part of the indigenous culture has a connection to animism. So I'm not endorsing.
Now, when you say removal, was that a forcible removal? Was there like some choice? Hey, would you like your kids to go to no school or to our school or to that school or our school?
For most of them, there wasn't a schooling option. This was during the time when the Aboriginals were still moving around in northern Canada.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't as settled. They had reservations, but they didn't stay really on them.
Mm-hmm.
And so the
So we're
missionary.
talking roughly from about 1870s to 1960s, more or less.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the window is. I just
Okay.
know that there was a huge culture shift when many, and the ones that I knew and met have passed away in the last 10 years,
Mm-hmm.
that were taken from their homes, taken to schools. The schools were far away from their homes. They, it didn't matter what the age was, they were all, all taken. If they were of school age, so that, that's different if you're a teenager versus, a 7-year old like what I have.
Yeah.
So very traumatic experience for many of them. And there was a communal belief that many people didn't make it back. I'm not sure, um, you know, how that works based off of the facts that we're talking about. Like there hasn't been anything found. Um, it is so embedded in the culture that there's a distrust for anything dealing with uh, um, Christianity that doesn't, well, just to be blunt, that comes from someone that's white. And so there's this. I know one of my issues when I got there was, how can you believe the white man's faith? That was a huge conversation. And so I, challenged them. It's not about white people at all.
Right.
This is about God Creator working through His chosen people and creating an opportunity for all men to know Him. Like
Right.
that's what it's about. No, it doesn't vary based off of your race. The um the hurt though is so real, whether it's true or not, that it makes it hard to have conversations about your faith, especially when in Western world we come with a goal to convert, and in Eastern world they come with a goal to be in relationship. And so for them, the fact that you want to change me before you know me is a huge problem. And I get that. I respect that. That is a huge problem. That gets to what we're talking about, that colonialistic mindset that I know better. Um, if I love you well, you're gonna want to know who is the Jesus that I follow. You're gonna want to understand, what is this praying thing that I do, and how does the Holy Spirit fit, and how do they relate to Jesus? And you talk about God the Father, like you're going to hear me. The reality for most of the Aboriginals is that um, those that were teaching them, based off of what I've heard, did not express love in a
Mm-hmm.
way that was true. They expressed a desire to change them more than know them. And so,
Their focus was on conformity to some measure,
correct. I want to make you
some
religious, not
qualifications.
righteous. I mean, the goal is,
Talk this way, dress this way, walk this way. Don't do those things. Do these things. Cut your hair. whatever it might
Correct.
be.
Exactly. You got it exactly right. I need you to change on the
Quote these
outside more than
scriptures.
the inside.
You got to memorize these things, and if you don't, that's where we're going to start bringing corporal punishment
Correct.
or other kinds of abusive coercion. Um, you know, beatings, sleep deprivation, food deprivation, all in the name of demonstrating to you how good this God is who laid down his life for you.
Right.
Got it. Got it. See, what's difficult is that one of the difficulties in having this conversation
Mm-hmm.
is it does disservice to every single person whom Christ died for us to talk in generalities.
Well, and
You
see,
know?
that is the tough part when you're dealing with um, a hurt that is someone else's, and I have to respect it just to be heard, right? Like I have
Mm-hmm.
to engage with this, and for me, um, my main thing wasn't to be there about what happened with Christians in the past. So I
Right.
wasn't looking to say like I don't think I ever had.
It almost sounds like it took you off guard when you got
Well,
there.
it was it was one of those things. The missionaries, the training that I went through, they didn't warn me about that. They warned me about a whole bunch of stuff, but that wasn't the thing that they warned me
Apparently not the important
about.
things.
And so the the hurt was being passed on
Mm-hmm.
in the tribe, um, and that's part of the culture because it hadn't been addressed.
Yep.
Um, and so you're seeing those coming up carrying that same weight, and that makes the conversation um, heavy with um, the the desire to put you in a category or label you somehow away.
Mm.
And so I personally just didn't fit into those categories because I didn't come.
As is often the case with you, my friend.
And so the label just didn't work. But no, um, once you were adopted in, then you could share. It became easier for people to be able to listen and to hear and understand. The hurt was still there. All I could do was sit with them through it because I'm not going to take on the responsibility of anyone else in the past. That's not my story. I'm not going to buy into the narrative that I need to fix your problems. Like that comes from a different culture. That's not my culture. When we talk about that colonial culture, my culture isn't one where I need to fix your problems. I journey with you. And so the fact that there is a problem is something we talk about, and I respect it, and I will be vulnerable with you, but I'm not going to take over the issue for you because I think I know what to do.
You were dealing with individuals with individual and corporate stories of identity and legacy,
Mhm.
while you were also doing the work of building community and trust such that you could at some point convey the message of the gospel
Mhm.
in a way that was appropriate and meaningful and
Correct.
prayerful.
Correct.
Most Christians are never going to be in that situation, whether good or bad. Most Christians are uh,
I
most
think
Christians will never be in the situation that you were in. Just the
I will
vast majority.
agree as far as the in northern Canada in Saskatchewan, but I look at where most people
Yeah, I
live.
know. I
Eyes,
caught myself with knowing
yeah,
what your response was going to be, which why I
there
pulled
is an
that back.
opportunity around you, and it doesn't mean that it has to be across racial
Well,
lines.
see, and this is why I want to have this conversation, because what you just described, your perspective has been shaped by the experience that you had with these individuals. I think for most Christians who will not be in a formal missionary setting,
Mhm.
the general response to the idea that there's a colonial movement
Mhm.
within Christianity is one that first and foremost raises a defensive posture and an argumentative posture.
Mm.
Because we can say, well, you're talking about generalities, and there was no organization of missions. There were many, many organizations. There are many missions organizations. There are many, many hundreds of thousands of missionaries, and many of them, and possibly most of them, never did the things you're talking about and did great work and sacrifice. And to this, I say at least in the culture in which I grew up, there is a patronizing, a elevating of the sacrifice and the obedience of missionaries that does make it so that stories of abuse, the histories of unfaithfulness, the histories of things that we would look at and say, boy, wait a bit. But I respect this missionary. I've heard his stories all my life. I patterned my life after certain things that he did. And you're telling me that he also did this? Well, I've never heard that before, so I reject that because I've never heard that, or this is the first time I'm hearing that, or it doesn't line up with what I have heard. There's a filtering that goes on because of in literature they call it hagiification, right? The sanctifying of heroes, the hero fine. And I think that that's present here because I think at the same time it is true that there wasn't a mission organization that was going out with a mandate to make every culture in the world like European culture. In that sense, colonialization is the wrong term. However, in many, many cases where missionaries were going out, it was the norm, not the exception, that the missionary who went out did seek to change the culture that he was going to or she was going to be more like his own culture. No, I understand that. That impulse is understandable. It is um, reasonable because we all have a context that we know and we base how we see things, our perspective, out of that context.
I do think part of it comes though with, just to be honest, out of a prideful heart.
And that's exactly where I'm going with this. That's exactly where I'm going with this.
Well-meaning,
because whether or not it comes out of a good place or a bad place is important. And also, whether or not it comes out of a good place or a bad place, the impact that it has and whether you're being attentive to the impact is also important. You can come with good intentions, do good things, and have a negative impact because you weren't paying attention. That's not a good thing. It's called being negligent.
I had a friend in DC. He's still a friend. He took a job in Baltimore for a season, and God had put on his heart to really serve, minister, to love those that were homeless. Well-paying job, 6 figures, all that good stuff.
And he was still homeless?
No, say again? No, he actually chose to keep his house in DC, but to stay in a homeless shelter most nights, and was challenged by God in his quiet time to do it. And it was one of those things where it allowed him to understand how we often care wrong because we don't take the time to be humble and come alongside. My challenge is always to slow down and try and figure out, okay, God, what are you doing? Not what do I want to do? Because it's easy, and typically I want to fix it or figure it out and complete it so I can say that I've done it. But often, just like with Christ coming and walking the earth for 33 years, there is a process of coming to know the people you're going to die for. And it's not just solving it. I mean, God could have done that. He spoke creation. He could have just spoke sin away. Like it's understandable how we rationalize the time and energy we have by distracting ourselves continually and living in a self-centered mindset. But when we come to Christ, we are to be other focused, focused on God and others before self. And that change should impact the way that we share Christ. That change should impact the way that we engage with our neighbors and love our family. Like it's not just a Sunday thing or a Bible study thing, and then I go and act as though I don't know him. It's a relational thing.
Christ said in the Great Commission, go into all the world, and as you go, make disciples, which is to say, make people who do what you do, and teach them to follow everything I've commanded you. I can understand how, like in so many other areas, we took a correct instruction from God and then applied it more broadly because we were trying to be safe. I understand that. It's normal to take a fence that God has set and say, well, God said stay 10 feet away, so we're going to put this feet 50 feet away just to be sure. I don't know why I went to that voice, but that's my 50 feet away voice.
Okay.
When we do that, unless we're actually teaching them to do everything Christ has commanded us, then we're not following the Great Commission. As soon as we go beyond what Christ has commanded us and we start teaching them more than that, we're no longer doing the Great Commission. And we are responsible both to follow the Great Commission and when we have exceeded it out of our zeal or out of our fear or out of our concern or out of our control or pride or whatever it might be. Number one, bad things will happen. And number two, it is our responsibility, not just as the missionaries, but as the mission organizations that sent those missionaries and as the organizations that work with the sending organizations and support them, to say, that was not right. That is not what we were called to do. That is not in keeping with what Christ has told us to do. And that is not what we said we were doing. We erred. We did this wrong. It is our fault and it is our responsibility. And we are sorry and we ask for forgiveness and we work towards restoration, which is not easy. I mean,
No, it's not.
that's not easy. But that's how we're called to live, not pretending like we don't make mistakes because Jesus is perfect. And Jesus is perfect, not Jer, not Joe. Christians have been responsible for a lot of bad policy because Christians have gone in with an intent to follow God, to be zealous, to be righteous. And instead of teaching, this is how you love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength, we've said, dress like me, talk like me, sit like me, eat like me. Build your government like me and like mine, because this is the way that God has called us to live. And that's a foul. Whether or not the people who did this, it's not even arguable that the people who did this also gave very sacrificially, also sought to obey God very zealously, also gave their lives to a good thing. And they are to be commended for that. But what we are not free to do is to, on the one hand, give commendation for the good that has been accomplished, while also ignoring what was done wrong. We are to walk in integrity. That's how we love God. That's how we walk out the life of service and the life of obedience that He's called us to. And I don't like to think about this train of wrecked lives and of hurt stories and of hurt hearts that grew up where so much gospel work was done. But if we don't reckon with that and if we don't wrestle with that, what we end up doing is maligning the name of Christ. Our zeal to protect the name of Christ. Number one, we need to check that because Christ will protect his own name.
Mm-hmm.
But number two, our zeal to protect the name of Christ ought to never lead us to denying the wrongs that we ourselves have done. Christ is full of grace and truth, and we can best follow him by acknowledging those things that have been done that should not have, taking responsibility for them,
And see
repenting.
that is countercultural because we live in the Facebook world where everything. I mean, we so much don't want to be vulnerable. We're happy to be transparent. We are happy to be transactional. We don't like things messy, and yet being vulnerable is messy, and following Christ is definitely requires being vulnerable.
Yeah.
The accountability with others as well as with God and all three parts of Him, knowing that He sees all, knows all, and sees the heart. It requires us to be prayerful, and I think it also requires us to be humble, um, and it then also, just as Christ died for us, requires us to put love first, um, with the goal of knowing that there isn't a price too high for seeing someone come to Him. Um, and so I'm willing to do anything so that you can come to know Him.
He said, count it. He said, count it joy
Correct.
when you are faithfully used,
Yeah.
when they lie about you, when they malign you. He also said that if you're beaten for things you've done, why are you complaining?
Correct. There's a
But if
blessing.
you're beaten for things that you haven't done, then bear it with grace, bear it well, because that's the example that Christ set for us. Please, let's let that be our starting point, not, well, I'm gonna get all bent out of shape and my nose is gonna get out of joint because there's this apparently false report about things that clearly are being exaggerated for the cause of hurting me or hurting Christ. No, no, no. When those do happen, count it joy. Count yourself blessed to have been counted worthy to suffer for Christ as he suffered. But when it's for things that you've done or that have been done in your name, with your financial backing, with your prayer backing, anything done in the dark will be brought into the light. Therefore, let the light shine in it so that it may be known for what it is. And glory will be given to God. And God will hold all things to judge them.
Amen. There you go. I think you landed.
Tried to. Little squishy. Blingy, 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 blingy.
Thanks for listening to us. It's a blessing to be able to be in your ears, and we hope you've been encouraged to love others better, and to love as Christ has loved you. We'll see you soon. We'll be in your ears. Bye-bye.